The moment the new CEO's lips curled into that smug half-smile, I knew my 25 years here were about to be erased in one sentence. "You're not aligned with our vision," he said, his voice dripping with rehearsed authority as the entire boardroom held its breath. I responded with a single word, "Noted," and walked out, my heels echoing against marble floors. What he didn't know was that by firing me, he'd already signed his own resignation letter. He just didn't realize the date yet. My name is Claire Monroe, and for 25 years, I've been the backbone of Vanguard Edge Systems. At 46, I've outlasted 3 CEOs, survived 2 recessions, and pulled this company from the brink of bankruptcy more times than anyone cares to remember. But none of that mattered when Ethan Cade walked through our doors 6 months ago. The boardroom was suffocating that morning. 23 executives sat around the obsidian conference table, their coffee cups untouched, their phones face down in submission. Ethan stood at the head of the room, his Armani suit as sharp as the blade he was about to swing. Behind him, the Manhattan skyline stretched endlessly through floor-to-ceiling windows, indifferent to the execution about to take place. "As we move forward with our restructuring," Ethan began, his voice cutting through the silence like ice breaking, "we need to ensure every member of leadership aligns with our new vision." His eyes found mine across the table. "Unfortunately, some of you have become too comfortable with the old ways." The room shifted imperceptibly, bodies tensed, breathing slowed. Everyone knew what was coming, but no one expected him to do it here, in front of everyone. "Claire," he said, drawing out my name like he was savoring wine. "Your services are no longer required." The words hung in the air. I felt 22 pairs of eyes boring into me, waiting for the explosion, the tears, the pleading. They'd seen others crumble under Ethan's public executions. Just last week, our VP of marketing had sobbed openly when he'd dismissed her mid-presentation. But I simply looked at him, really looked at him. This 38-year-old wunderkind who'd swept in with his MBA jargon and his entourage of yes men from his previous company. His lips curved into that practiced half-smile, the one he probably rehearsed in his bathroom mirror. "You're not aligned with our vision," he continued, the phrase rolling off his tongue with mechanical precision. I let the silence stretch for 3 heartbeats. Then I stood, smoothing my charcoal blazer with deliberate calm. "Noted," I said, my voice steady as granite. The word landed like a slap. Ethan's smile faltered for a microsecond, so brief that probably only I caught it. I gathered my leather portfolio, leaving my company laptop closed on the table. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I walked toward the door, each step measured, unhurried. "Security will escort you out," Ethan called after me, trying to regain control of his narrative. I paused at the door, my hand on the chrome handle. Without turning, I replied, "They know the way." The door closed behind me with a soft whisper, but I knew the silence I left behind was deafening. As I walked past the cubicles toward my office, I caught glimpses of faces, some sympathetic, others fearful. The atmosphere in this place had changed since Ethan's arrival. Gone were the collaborative meetings and open-door policies. Now, people kept their heads down, worked late to show dedication, and avoided eye contact in the hallways. Fear had become the new corporate culture. My assistant, Patricia, stood frozen by my office door, her face pale. "Ms. Monroe." "It's fine, Patricia," I said, touching her shoulder gently. "This too shall pass." Inside my office, I surveyed 25 years of my life. Awards lined the walls. Photos captured moments of triumph, signing the Harbinger deal that saved us from Chapter 11, the Shanghai expansion that tripled our market cap, the Innovation Summit where we launched the platform that became our flagship product. All of it orchestrated by me, though my name rarely appeared in the press releases. But Ethan didn't know about the other things. The quiet arrangements, the handshake deals, the off-the-books understandings that kept this company's heart beating. Most importantly, he didn't know about the legacy portfolio, Martin Hale's final gift to me before his retirement as founder. A web of investments and agreements so delicate, so precisely balanced, that one missed payment, one overlooked renewal, could trigger a cascade of penalties that would gut Vanguard edge systems from the inside out. And every detail of it lived only in my mind. The anger didn't come immediately. It arrived later that evening as I sat in my study, a glass of Macallan 18 in my hand, watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked windows. It wasn't hot rage, no. That would have been too simple, too predictable. This was something colder, more precise, the kind of anger that crystallizes into purpose. I thought about the nights I'd spent in that office, long after everyone else had gone home. The Christmas Eve when I'd saved the Morrison acquisition by catching a calculation error that would have cost us $30 million. The weekend I'd flown to Tokyo on my own dime to smooth over a cultural misunderstanding that nearly destroyed our Asian partnerships. The countless times I'd quietly fixed problems before they could reach the board's attention, never asking for recognition, never needing the spotlight. My phone buzzed, a text from Nate Rivers, one of the few senior managers who'd survived Ethan's purge. The whole building's in shock. This is insane. I didn't respond. Let them think I was devastated. Let them imagine me at home, crushed and defeated. They had no idea that Ethan had just handed me the most powerful position I'd ever held. The position of someone with nothing left to lose and everything needed to destroy him. The legacy portfolio. Even the name was innocuous. Deliberately so. Martin Hale had been paranoid about digital footprints, industrial espionage, hostile takeovers. So he'd built this network the old-fashioned way. Personal relationships, verbal agreements confirmed with handwritten notes, investment structures that existed in legal documents scattered across a dozen law firms, none of which held the complete picture. "Claire," he'd said that day 5 years ago, his hands trembling slightly from early-stage Parkinson's. "I'm trusting you with something that could either save or destroy this company. These arrangements, they're like a house of cards. Beautiful when standing, catastrophic when they fall." He'd spent 3 days walking me through it all. The renewable energy fund that required quarterly confirmations, miss one, and we'd owe $8 million in penalties. The patent sharing agreement with Terraform Industries that needed annual renegotiation, let it lapse, and we'd lose access to critical technology. The convertible bonds held by Harrington Capital with acceleration clauses so Byzantine that even their own lawyers needed my explanations. 43 separate arrangements in total, each with its own timeline, its own quirks, its own relationships that needed nurturing. I'd managed them flawlessly for 5 years, keeping them in my head, never creating a digital trail that could be hacked or stolen. Ethan thought he was getting rid of dead weight, trimming the fat from his lean, mean corporate machine. He had no idea he'd just cut out the company's memory. I pulled out a legal pad, paper, always paper, and began sketching the timeline. The first domino would fall in 6 days, the Harrington Capital Quarterly Review. Without my confirmation letter, sent from my specific company email with very specific wording they'd grown accustomed to over the years, they'd assume breach of contract. The penalties would start small, $50,000 a day for the first week, then they'd escalate. The Shanghai Industrial Bank credit line would need renewal in 12 days. That required a phone call to Mr. Wei, conducted in Mandarin, referencing a dinner conversation from 3 years ago. Ethan didn't speak Mandarin. Neither did anyone on his imported team. The Prometheus Fund's investment terms included a clause requiring continuity of senior management familiar with initial terms. My termination had just triggered a review period. If they weren't satisfied with the transition plan, and how could they be when no transition existed, they could demand immediate repayment of their $40 million investment. I walked to my window, looking out at the Vanguard Edge building 12 blocks away, its logo glowing blue against the night sky. Somewhere up there, probably on the executive floor, Ethan was likely celebrating with his inner circle. Champagne, no doubt. Self-congratulatory speeches about new directions and fresh blood. He had no idea the countdown had already begun. My phone rang. Martin Hale's name appeared on the screen. "I heard," he said without preamble. His voice was rougher now, the Parkinson's having progressed, but his mind remained sharp as ever. News travels fast. Claire, the legacy portfolio is perfectly safe, I said, cutting him off gently. Everything is under control. A long pause. Then, quietly, you're going to let it burn, aren't you? I took another sip of whiskey, feeling its warmth spread through my chest. I'm not going to do anything. Martin, I was fired, remember? I no longer have any responsibilities to Vanguard Edge Systems. Claire, get some rest. Martin, you're retired. Enjoy it. I hung up and turned back to my legal pad. 6 days until the first crack, 2 weeks until the fissures became visible, 3 weeks until complete structural failure. Ethan Cade thought he'd won with his public execution, but he'd just started a timer on a bomb he didn't even know existed. The next morning arrived gray and bitter, matching my mood perfectly. I returned to Vanguard Edge Systems one last time, accompanied by a security guard who looked uncomfortable with his assignment. Tommy. His badge read, I'd hired him 8 years ago, straight out of community college. I'm sorry about this, Ms. Monroe, he whispered as we rode the elevator. Just doing your job. Tommy, I replied, watching the floors tick by. We all have our roles to play. My office felt different in the morning light, already foreign, as if it belonged to someone else. I moved deliberately, taking only what was mine. The photos went into a single banker's box. My personal books, leather-bound editions of business classics I'd actually read. Unlike the decorative libraries in most executive offices. The small cactus my daughter had given me when she was 12, now thriving despite conventional wisdom about office plants. But it was what I left behind that mattered. On my desk, I placed an empty locked box, an antique thing of brass and mahogany that Martin had given me years ago. The key was long lost, or so everyone would think. Inside was nothing but air and possibility. Let them wonder. Let them bring in locksmiths, speculate about what secrets it might contain. The truth was far simpler and far more devastating. The real secrets had never been locked away at all. I opened my desk drawers, making a show of checking each one. In the bottom drawer, beneath old business cards and expired mint tins, lay a single folder marked Personal Notes, 2019. I lifted it, glanced inside at the innocuous vacation receipts, then set it back down with deliberate carelessness, leaving the drawer slightly ajar. Someone would find it. Someone always went through the departed's desk, searching for ammunition or advantage. They'd find nothing useful, but they'd waste hours trying to decode meaning from meaninglessness. 15 minutes, Ms. Monroe, Tommy said apologetically. I nodded and moved to my computer. It had already been disabled. It worked fast under Ethan's regime. But the physical machine remained. I ran my fingers along its edge, a gesture anyone watching would interpret as nostalgia. In reality, I was checking that the tiny USB drive I taped there months ago was gone. It was good. That meant Ethan's security sweep had found it, and they were probably celebrating their discovery of my hidden files. The drive contained nothing but corrupted data and a particularly nasty virus that would activate if anyone tried to force decrypt it. A small gift to their IT department, courtesy of my paranoid preparations. Patricia knocked softly and entered, carrying a small orchid. The team wanted you to have this, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Behind her, I could see faces gathered in the hallway, my people, the ones who'd worked late with me, who'd trusted my judgment when the board wavered. Tell them thank you, I said, accepting the plant. Its purple blooms were perfect, almost defiant in their beauty. As I packed the orchid carefully, Patricia leaned closer. Ms. Monroe, the Harrington files. Should I? You should do exactly what Mr. Cade tells you to do, I said firmly, loud enough for anyone listening to hear. Then, quieter. You're a smart woman, Patricia. You'll figure it out. Her eyes widened slightly with understanding. She knew about Harrington's requirements, had seen me handle those relationships for years. But she didn't know the passwords, the specific phrases, the personal connections that made it all work. Nobody did. I picked up my box, surprisingly light for 25 years of work. As I turned to leave, I paused at my wall of achievements. The framed press release from our IPO, the photo of the entire team after we'd won the Bernstein Innovation Award. My fingers lingered on a small, unremarkable certificate. A perfect attendance award from my first year. A joke gift from Martin when I'd worked 365 days straight. I left them all hanging there. Trophies for Ethan to stare at while his empire crumbled. The walk to the elevator felt longer than usual. Employees lined the hallways, some pretending to work, others openly watching. A few nodded, subtle gestures of respect and rebellion. Most just looked afraid. They knew that if someone like me could be eliminated so easily, no one was safe. In the lobby, I stopped at the security desk to turn in my badge. As I unclipped it from my jacket, I noticed Ethan watching from the mezzanine above, flanked by his imported executives. Our eyes met. He raised his coffee cup in a mock salute, that infuriating half-smile playing on his lips. I simply looked through him, as if he were glass, and handed my badge to the desk guard. "Take care, Ms. Monroe," the guard said. "Oh, I will," I replied, shifting the box in my arms. The orchid's blooms trembled slightly, but remained unbroken. As I pushed through the revolving doors into the gray morning, I didn't look back. Behind me lay 25 years of dedication. Ahead lay something far more satisfying, the perfect strategic withdrawal, executed with precision. The countdown had begun. 6 days until Harrington, 12 until Shanghai, 18 until Prometheus. And Ethan Cade, standing at his mezzanine perch like a king surveying his kingdom, had no idea his castle was built on sand that I'd been holding in place. Now, I was letting go. Day 3, post-termination. I sat in my home office, watching the orchid from my team catch the morning sun. My phone had been silent. No corporate calls, no urgent emails. To the outside world, Claire Monroe had simply vanished into the ether of discarded executives. But in the intricate machinery of Vanguard Edge systems, tiny gears were already beginning to slip. The first sign would be invisible to most. The Harrington Capital Review required a specific sequence, an email confirmation by the 15th of each quarter, followed by a phone call to their senior partner, Jonathan Harrington himself, within 48 hours. The email had to reference their internal project code, Prometheus 7, a detail buried in paragraph 17 of our original agreement. Miss it, and their automated system would flag the account for review. Today was the 13th. 2 days until the email deadline. My personal phone buzzed, Nate Rivers. Strange thing, Patricia's been asking about some Harrington protocol. Nobody seems to know the details. Ethan told her to figure it out or find a new job. I didn't respond. Patricia was smart, but intelligence without information was useless. She might find the contract in the system, might even locate the project code if she dug deep enough. But she wouldn't know about Jonathan's peculiarity. He only accepted confirmations from email addresses he'd personally authorized. Mine had been the only one from Vanguard for 5 years. The Shanghai situation was even more delicate. Mr. Wei of Shanghai. Industrial Bank had old-school sensibilities. He believed in relationships, not companies. Every month, I'd call him at exactly 3 p.m. Shanghai time, and we'd discuss his grandson's progress at NYU before moving to business. It was a ritual, a dance of respect that Western executives like Ethan would dismiss as inefficient. The credit line renewal wasn't just paperwork, it required Wei's personal approval. Without it, Vanguard's entire Asian supply chain would freeze. $40 million in daily transactions would simply stop. I pulled up my personal investment portfolio, making minor adjustments. Shorting Vanguard stock would be too obvious, potentially illegal. But divesting from certain mutual funds that held Vanguard positions? Simply prudent financial planning. My doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I saw a FedEx driver with an overnight envelope, the return address, Terraform Industries. Inside, a handwritten note from their CEO, Robert Tesler. Claire, heard about the changes at Vanguard. If you're interested, we have a position that would suit your talents perfectly. No rush. The offer stands whenever you're ready. Robert. Attached was a formal offer letter. The number was impressive, but more interesting was the timing. Terraform knew our patent sharing agreement would need renegotiation in 20 days. They were already positioning themselves for advantage. I filed the letter away. Not yet. The symphony of destruction needed to play out first. Day 4 arrived with rain. Somewhere in the Vanguard building, Patricia would be discovering that the Harrington folder on the shared drive contained only executed contracts, not the procedural notes. Those had lived in my head, shared once a year in person with Martin Hale during our legacy review lunches. The Prometheus Fund would be next to notice something amiss. Their analyst, a sharp young woman named Jennifer Shu, always cross-referenced our quarterly confirmations with market movements. Without my input, the numbers wouldn't align. She'd flag it to her superiors, who'd demand explanations that Ethan couldn't provide. I spent the afternoon tending to my garden, hands in soil, thinking about root systems, how they spread underground, invisible but essential. How pulling out one plant could destabilize an entire bed if the roots were intertwined deeply enough. My neighbor, a retired federal judge, stopped by the fence. Early retirement, he asked, having noticed my weekday presence. Something like that, I replied, brushing dirt from my hands. Their loss, he said simply, and walked on. Day 5. The Harrington deadline tomorrow. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Patricia, 3 from Nate, and 1 from a number I recognized as Martin Hale's personal line. I didn't answer any of them. Legal liability required complete separation. I couldn't be accused of sabotage if I simply didn't engage. That evening, I opened a bottle of the good wine, a 2015 Chateau Margaux I'd been saving. As I poured, I thought about the conference room where Ethan had executed me so publicly. Tomorrow, that same room would likely host a very different kind of meeting. Urgent, panicked, searching for answers that no longer existed within their walls. The beauty of the legacy portfolio wasn't its complexity, it was its simplicity. Every arrangement was legal, documented, filed properly. But the human element, the relationships that made it all work, those couldn't be transferred like data files or downloaded from a cloud server. Ethan had built his career on the idea that everything could be systematized, digitized, made efficient. He was about to learn that some things, trust, relationships, institutional knowledge, couldn't be coded into an algorithm or captured in a spreadsheet. My grandfather had been a watchmaker. He'd once shown me a pocket watch with hundreds of tiny parts. Remove one gear, he'd said, and it might still tick, but it won't keep time. Remove the right gear, and it stops immediately. I'd been that gear, the one that looked small, insignificant, easy to replace. The wine was perfect, complex, layered, patient, like revenge served at exactly the right temperature. Tomorrow, the first bill would come due, and Ethan Cade, the man who knew the price of everything but the value of nothing, would begin to understand the true cost of that public execution he'd orchestrated. Day 6. 4:47 p.m. My phone exploded with notifications. The first crack had appeared. Nate's text was almost comedic in its understatement. Houston, we have a problem. Patricia's voicemail, left at 4:23 p.m., was more revealing. Ms. Monroe, I know you can't legally advise us, but if you could just... If there's anything you can share about Harrington Capital, please. Mr. Cade is furious. The story unfolded through fragments, texts from former colleagues, a frantic LinkedIn message from someone in accounting, and finally, a call from Martin Hale that I actually answered. They found it, he said without preamble. His voice carried a mixture of dread and dark amusement. The Harrington notice, it was buried in Patricia's spam folder for 3 days before she thought to check. By the time she found it, the deadline had passed. Unfortunate, I said neutrally, sipping my afternoon tea. Claire, this is serious. The penalty clause is 50,000 a day for the first week, escalating to 200,000 daily after that, with a balloon payment of 8 million if the breach extends past 30 days. I finished. I remember the terms, Martin. I negotiated them. Silence on his end. Then, Ethan doesn't know about the escalation clause yet. He thinks it's just the daily penalties. Of course he didn't know. He'd probably had some junior associate skim the contract, pull out the key points, and summarize them in a PowerPoint deck. The devil, as always, lived in the details, specifically in subsection 47C of the appendix. Jonathan Harrington called me personally. Martin continued. Professional courtesy. He wanted to know if there had been some mistake. I told him there had been a transition. And he laughed, Claire. Actually laughed. Said he'd been expecting this call since he heard about your termination. I smiled, imagining Jonathan's dry British chuckle. He'd warned me once that American companies treated institutional knowledge like fast fashion, disposable, replaceable, always chasing the next trend. By 6 p.m., the situation had escalated. Patricia, in desperation, had tried to send the confirmation email herself, crafting what she thought was appropriate language. But she didn't know about Prometheus 7. She didn't know that Jonathan only read emails that began with a specific salutation. Regarding our continuing partnership, a quirk born from his hatred of cold corporate speak. Her email had been automatically filtered to his assistant's queue, where it would sit for another week before anyone noticed. That evening, I received another text from Nate. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. Ethan's bringing in outside consultants to assess the situation. He's claiming it's a minor administrative glitch. Minor administrative glitch. That's what he was calling an $8 million ticking time bomb. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop, not to help, but to watch. Vanguard's stock price hadn't moved yet. The market didn't know. But institutional investors had radar for these things. The whispers would start soon. My phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. Ms. Monroe? The voice was young, nervous. This is Jennifer Shue from Prometheus Fund. I'd been expecting this call. Ms. Shue, I said warmly. How can I help you? I'm not sure you can, but I had to try. We haven't received our quarterly portfolio review from Vanguard, the one you usually send. Mr. Cade's office sent something, but it's wrong. The numbers don't match our models. I'm no longer with Vanguard, Jennifer. I'm sure Mr. Cade's team, they don't understand the underlying derivatives, she burst out. The person who compiled this report thinks our position is simple equity. But you know we have those synthetic swaps tied to the renewable energy credits. And if those aren't properly hedged by the 20th, then you trigger the rebalancing clause, I finished softly. And Vanguard has to provide additional collateral. 40 million in additional collateral, she whispered. Ms. Monroe. They don't have 40 million in liquid assets. I've seen their latest filing. No, they didn't. That cash was tied up in Ethan's aggressive expansion plan, his grand vision of market domination through strategic acquisition. He'd leveraged everything, assuming the steady income streams would continue. Jennifer, I said carefully, you have a fiduciary duty to your investors. Whatever decision you make has to be based on that duty. I understand, she said quietly. I wanted to give you a heads up. Professional courtesy, you've always been straight with us. After she hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, watching the city lights flicker on. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably on his third conference call of the evening, barking at lawyers, demanding solutions. But you can't solve a problem you don't understand. And Ethan didn't even know how many problems were heading his way. The Shanghai deadline was in 6 days. Wei had probably already noticed he hadn't received his monthly call. He was old school enough to take that personally, wealthy enough not to care about Vanguard's business if respect wasn't shown. Terraform's patent renegotiation loomed in 2 weeks. Without those patents, Vanguard's newest product line, the one Ethan had been touting to investors as their next billion-dollar revenue stream, would be legally frozen. The beautiful thing about dominoes wasn't watching them fall. It was the moment just before when they stood perfectly aligned, trembling with potential energy, waiting for that first gentle push. That push had just happened in Patricia's spam folder. Now came the cascade. Day 12. The storm had arrived in full force. I watched from my local coffee shop as the financial news ticker scrolled across the screen. Vanguard Edge Systems faces liquidity crisis as multiple investors demand explanations. My phone had become a monument to desperation. 43 missed calls from Patricia, 27 from various board members, and 18 from numbers I didn't recognize but assumed were Ethan's crisis management team. I'd changed my voicemail to a simple message. You've reached Claire Monroe. I'm currently unavailable for consulting opportunities with former employers. The Shanghai situation had detonated yesterday. Without his monthly call, Mr. Wei had taken Ethan's silence as a profound insult. When Ethan finally tried to reach out, 8 days late, Wei's assistant informed him that Mr. Wei was reconsidering his position with Western partners who lacked proper business etiquette. The credit line, $40 million that Vanguard needed to pay their Asian suppliers, was frozen pending review. Nate had been feeding me updates through carefully worded texts that maintained legal distance. Heard from a friend that VES can't make Friday supplier payments. Ethan called emergency meeting with bank consortium. The Prometheus Fund had made their move this morning. Jennifer Zhu, good to her word about fiduciary duty, had triggered the rebalancing clause. $40 million in collateral, due within 72 hours. The letter had apparently arrived during Ethan's staff meeting, delivered by courier with the kind of fanfare that ensured everyone knew something catastrophic had happened. But the truly beautiful disaster was unfolding with Terraform Industries. Robert Tesler had sent his renegotiation team early, a week ahead of schedule. They'd arrived this morning, expecting to meet with me for the annual patent review. Instead, they'd been greeted by one of Ethan's junior executives who didn't even know what patents were under discussion. Patricia had called Robert directly, begging for time. He'd given them 48 hours to prepare a competent negotiation team. The problem was, I'd been negotiating those agreements for 8 years. I knew every clause, every give and take, every point of leverage. Ethan's team would be walking in blind, holding documents they didn't understand, fighting for terms they couldn't evaluate. The coffee shop's bell chimed, and Martin Hale walked in. He'd aged visibly in the past week, the stress of watching his life's work crumble affecting him more than his Parkinson's ever had. "You look well," he said, sitting across from me uninvited. "Retirement suits me." He studied my face for a long moment. "They're offering you $7 million to come back as a consultant. Full reinstatement, senior advisory role, your own team." "Who's offering? Ethan?" I laughed. He'd rather watch it all burn than admit he was wrong. "The board? They're preparing to remove him." Martin's hands trembled as he lifted his coffee. "Emergency vote scheduled for Monday. They've already got the votes. Good for them. Claire, this isn't just about Ethan anymore. 4,000 people work for Vanguard. They don't deserve a CEO who publicly executes senior staff for sport," I interrupted. "They don't deserve a culture of fear where expertise is dismissed and loyalty is punished." My phone buzzed. A news alert. Vanguard Edge Systems stock down 31% in pre-market trading. Martin saw it too. "The pension funds are pulling out," he said quietly. "If we drop below $40 a share, the automated sell-offs trigger, it'll be a bloodbath." I remembered setting up those institutional investment agreements. The pension funds had strict guidelines about company stability. Once uncertainty reached a certain threshold, their algorithms would dump the stock regardless of long-term potential. "Claire, please, I'm not asking for Ethan. I'm asking for the employees. For the company we built." "The company we built died the moment Ethan Cade walked through those doors," I said. "What exists now is his creation. Let him save it." Another news alert. Harrington Capital demands accelerated payment from Vanguard Edge Systems, citing material breach of covenant. The escalation clause had kicked in. $8 million due immediately, with the right to call in their entire investment, nearly $90 million, if payment wasn't received within 10 business days. Martin's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his face went white. "The CFO just resigned," he said, hanging up. "Effective immediately. He's claiming he wasn't given accurate information about our obligations." The rats were fleeing the sinking ship. The CFO had probably just discovered the full scope of the legacy portfolio, realized the magnitude of the disaster, and decided to save his own reputation. "There's more," Martin said. "Ethan's been calling investment banks all morning, trying to arrange emergency funding. They all want to see our full obligation schedule, including all the off-book arrangements. He can't provide it because it doesn't exist in any system." I finished. It existed in relationships, in trust, in understanding built over decades. A young man in a suit rushed into the coffee shop, scanning frantically until he spotted Martin. "Mr. Hale, the board needs you back immediately. Prometheus just called in their collateral. If we don't respond by 5 p.m., they're initiating hostile recovery." Martin stood slowly, looking every one of his 70 years. "Last chance. Claire, name your price." I turned back to my coffee, watching the steam rise and dissipate. I already did. 25 years of dedication. Ethan thought that price was too high. As Martin left, I saw him pause at the door, shoulders bowed under the weight of his company's collapse. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered Ethan's smirk, that practiced half-smile as he'd executed me in front of everyone, the way he'd said my name like he was savoring the kill. The storm was raging now, but I sat in its eye, perfectly calm, watching the destruction with the detached interest of someone observing a controlled demolition. The building was coming down exactly as planned. Day 15, Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. I stood across the street from Vanguard Edge Systems, watching as black town cars arrived in succession. Board members, their faces grim behind tinted windows. Martin Hale emerged from one, moving slowly but deliberately toward the building. The emergency board meeting, the one that would determine Ethan's fate, was about to begin. My phone buzzed. "Nate." Ethan just arrived, alone. His entire senior team abandoned him over the weekend. The rats hadn't just fled, they'd stampeded. Ethan's imported executives, the ones he'd brought from his previous company, had calculated the odds and decided their careers were better served elsewhere. Loyalty, it seemed, had a price point. At 9:47 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. "Ms. Monroe?" The voice was crisp, authoritative. "This is Richard Blackstone, chairman of Vanguard's board. We're in emergency session. I'm calling to formally request your immediate consultation." "Mr. Blackstone," I said evenly. "I believe Mr. Cade made it clear that my services were no longer aligned with Vanguard's vision." Through the phone, I heard a door slam. Shouting in the background, Ethan's voice, high and desperate. "This is a witch hunt. I was brought in to make hard decisions." "Mr. Cade has been asked to wait outside," Blackstone said, his composure returning. "Ms. Monroe, Prometheus Fund is demanding $40 million by close of business. Harrington Capital has given us 72 hours to pay $8 million plus accumulated penalties. Shanghai Industrial Bank has frozen $40 million in credit. We've just discovered 3 more critical agreements that require immediate attention. Without your knowledge..." "My knowledge came with a price," I interrupted. 25 years of investment in this company. That investment was liquidated without cause or consideration. "Name your terms." "I'll think about it." I hung up and walked into the building across the street, the one that housed Terraform Industries. Robert Tesler was waiting in his office. That patent agreement spread across his desk. "Claire," he greeted me warmly. "I assume you're here about the Vanguard situation." "I'm here about your offer," I said. "But first, I'm curious. What terms did Ethan's team propose for the patent renewal? Robert laughed, a rich, genuine sound. They didn't even know which patents were under discussion. The young man they sent asked if we could just extend everything as is. When I explained that as is included a 3% royalty reduction clause that kicked in this year, something you negotiated brilliantly, by the way, he went white. 3% of Vanguard's product revenue, nearly $12 million annually that Ethan's team had almost given away because they didn't understand what they were signing. The board just called me, Robert continued. They want to know if we'll postpone negotiations if you return as consultant. And I told them that depends entirely on who's sitting across the table. My phone buzzed continuously now, a symphony of desperation. I glanced at the screen. 17 messages from board members, 3 from major investors, 1 from Ethan himself. We need to talk, privately. At 11:30 a.m., something extraordinary happened. Martin Hale called, his voice strange, a mixture of disbelief and vindication. Ethan just tried to throw you under the bus, he said. Claimed you deliberately sabotaged the company by hiding critical information. The board asked him one question. If Ms. Monroe was so incompetent, why did you fire her publicly without ensuring proper transition? And he couldn't answer. Then Blackstone pulled out the security footage from your last day. You know, the one where you spent 3 hours in your office, clearly organizing files, with Patricia coming in and out. The one that shows you leaving everything in perfect order. I smiled. Of course there was footage. Ethan's paranoid security measures had captured his own incompetence. He's done, Claire. The vote was unanimous. Security is escorting him out now. I walked to Robert's window, looking across at Vanguard's building. There, emerging from the main entrance, was Ethan Cade. No entourage, no confident stride, just a man in an expensive suit, carrying a banker's box, walking toward a regular taxi, his company car privileges already revoked. He looked up, perhaps sensing observation, and our eyes met across the distance. For a moment, his mask slipped entirely. No smirk, no practiced expressions, just the naked realization of complete defeat. Claire? Martin's voice pulled me back. The board is prepared to offer you the CEO position. Full authority, your own terms. I watched Ethan's taxi disappear into traffic. Send me the offer in writing. I'll review it this afternoon. You'll come back? I'll consider it, but Martin, if I come back, things change. The culture of fear ends. The public executions stop. We build a company where institutional knowledge is valued, not discarded. Anything you want? I want it in writing. And Martin, I want Ethan's departure announced the same way he announced mine. Publicly, in front of everyone. A pause. Then, done. I ended the call and turned back to Robert. About that position at Terraform. Standing offer, he said, smiling. But something tells me you've got other plans. My phone screen lit up with a news alert. Breaking, Vanguard Edge Systems. CEO Ethan Cade terminated. Board seeks emergency leadership. The corporate world moved fast. By market close, everyone would know. Ethan Cade, the wonder boy who'd promised to revolutionize Vanguard, had been executed by his own sword. The door he'd shown me in that boardroom had swung both ways, and unlike him, I'd made sure to hold the key. 3 weeks later, I sat in my home office, afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the formal offer letter from Vanguard's board. CEO position. 15 million signing bonus. Complete autonomy to rebuild the company culture. Everything I could have wanted, delivered with the kind of desperation that only comes when people finally understand what they've lost. My phone sat silent beside the letter. No more frantic calls, no more panicked texts. The crisis had passed, managed by emergency consultants who'd charged 7 figures to reconstruct what I'd kept in my head for free. They'd saved the company, barely. Stock price stabilized at 60% of its previous value. Investors placated with promises of new leadership, and strategic restructuring, Ethan Cade had become a cautionary tale whispered in business schools and boardrooms. The CEO who destroyed a billion-dollar company in 15 days by firing the wrong person. LinkedIn posts dissected his failure. Harvard Business Review was preparing a case study. His name had become a verb in certain circles. Don't pull a Cade meant don't sacrifice institutional knowledge for ego. Patricia had called yesterday. She'd been promoted, CFO, ironically. The board wanted people who understood the real Vanguard, not Ethan's imaginary version of it. Everyone wants you back, she'd said. The employees, the investors, even the clients have been asking. And what do you want, Patricia? A long pause. I want to work for someone who values what we build, not just what we earn. Martin Hale visited that morning, looking healthier than he had in weeks. The company's survival had given him new energy, or perhaps it was just relief. You won, Claire, he said, settling into my study chair. Complete victory. Did I? I picked up a paperclip, bending it slowly. 4,000 people almost lost their jobs. The company lost 40% of its value. Relationships built over decades were nearly destroyed. But they weren't. Because you came back. I hadn't. Actually, not yet. The offer letter remained unsigned. I've been thinking about my father, I said. He worked for GM for 30 years, never missed a day. They laid him off 6 months before his pension fully vested. He spent his last years bitter, broken by betrayal. Martin shifted uncomfortably. That won't happen here. Not again. No. I agreed. It won't. I signed the letter with a fountain pen, old-fashioned, permanent, intentional. But I added one handwritten condition at the bottom. The legacy portfolio will be fully documented and transitioned to a team of 3 senior managers. No single point of failure, ever. Martin read it, nodded. Smart. I learned something these past 3 weeks, I said, handing him the signed agreement. Power isn't about being irreplaceable. It's about choosing when and how to be replaced. That evening, I stood once more outside Vanguard Edge Systems. The building looked the same, but everything had changed. Tomorrow. I'd walk through those doors as CEO. The employees would applaud. I'd been told they were planning something. The board would smile their relieved smiles. The business press would write their redemption stories. But tonight, I stood there thinking about Ethan Cade. Last I'd heard, he'd taken a position with a small consulting firm in Delaware. His fall from grace had been complete, public, devastating. Part of me felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, just the cold recognition of consequence meeting action. He'd thought leadership was about dominance, about public displays of power, about making others feel small so he could feel large. He'd learned, too late, that real power was quiet. It was knowing which gear made the watch run. It was the invisible threads that held everything together. I pulled out my phone and typed a single message to him. The door swings both ways. Make sure you hold the key. He'd probably delete it unread, or perhaps he'd understand. Finally, what had really happened? Either way, my point had been made. I walked home through the city streets, passing the coffee shop where I'd watched it all unfold, the restaurant where deals had been struck, the park where I'd cleared my head during the darkest moments of my career. This city, this life, this carefully constructed existence. I'd almost lost it all because one man confused fear for respect, confusion for control. The orchid my team had given me sat on my kitchen counter, still blooming, still defiant. I watered it carefully, thinking about resilience, about growth, about the quiet strength of things that endure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rebuilding trust, restoring culture, proving that knowledge and experience matter more than flash and bravado. It would be hard work, thankless at times, essential always. But tonight, in the soft glow of evening light, I raised a glass of wine to the empty room and made a toast. To the silent warriors, to the institutional knowledge keepers, to the ones who hold it all together without recognition or fanfare. And to the executives who forget we exist, may they learn, as Ethan did, that some silences are louder than any scream. The wine was perfect, patient, complex, worth the wait, just like revenge served at exactly the right temperature. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate justice and the power of institutional knowledge. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let's connect with fellow listeners around the world. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed similar situations in your workplace? Your stories and perspectives make our community richer. Until next time, remember, true power often lies in what goes unseen and unspoken.